Cradle, The Rise of the Chosen, Chapter 14, Part 2. Chinta, get out! The men that he made burn the food yelled, and Takuma and Gianoa took their leave into the black, torrential morning while Takuma fought to hold on to his faith at any cost, and he even repeated the phrase, Suluti Han, at any cost. He didn't know if the sun was out above the black cover or not. He had intently decided that he was going to end this damned plague one way or another. Under the umbrella of God, of course. He found himself and his wife between two ponds the floods had borne, and in the middle, in that gap, was the infirmary. He took that, this plague being the final one, to be a sign. It was a sign that hopefully this time he will receive God's love for him and his people and bring the spreading death to an end. He entered the infirmary with Gianoa in tow and waited to make sure she was well and set. Jinitue, Aiol, Katiton, Dino, Verti, Tikul. I've come. Saving you is my will for the true God, bellowed Takuma. He was speaking louder than ever before. Yundili, Intumi, Dio, Raka, Setu. Together, let us damn this filthy plague away. He pointed to the 6 sick people on the metal frame cots and looked at the nurses and the doctor, and he felt his eyes twitching in fervor. Yaka, Hiolut, Junki, Tiotama. Take all the sick outside, Takuma demanded. Tikul, Mondi, Miniman. Believe in the truth completely, he commanded, and somehow they didn't object and rolled the 6 patients in the cots outside in the rain. He only had to wait for 15 minutes, and by some horrid reality, some unforgiving logic, all of the sick men and women choked in the rain and died. The nurses and doctors and a few attending family members were furious, but now Takuma was on his knees in the thick and deep rank-smelling mud. He couldn't cry. He couldn't even hardly think. His heart was true, he knew it. Also, he would never deny the fact that the Father existed, and he was pretty sure that God loved him and the people of Cradle, but he was falling short. He had to figure out his error, and it was closer than he could put off. He knew the answer, but it was a speck in his eye, too close to see in focus at the moment. Finit, Olu, Genipti. You are a man of great faith, Gianoa began. Monti, Lotu. But we have to go now. It was still pouring incredibly hard at the moment. And then he looked behind his wife at the large crowd of villagers, and they all looked furious. He stayed on his knees until they were in his presence and then stood up looking at them, keeping his head up. One middle-aged man came to the forefront and pointed at Takuma with a shivering finger but fire in his eyes. Ayo, Yol, Noshilo, we're taking you there. Hihan, Ioyai, this is all because of you. Takuma smiled and said, do what you will. So the man grabbed Takuma's arm and they all made their way in the deep mud around the floodwaters into and back out of the swampy forest where the vegetation rotted and gave off a tremendously pungent gas. And there he was again, the now muddy and mossy sacrificial rock. Lokuji, up you go, screamed a few of the crowd. Gianoa was crying desperately, and she wouldn't let go of Takuma so that he could climb up to the altar. Then 3 men came and pulled her off of her husband, and she screamed so loudly that it was breaking Takuma's heart. Julimantu, Tikul, know it. Not my husband, God no. But once he was released, he found a way to climb the incredibly slick and unforgiving altar. He looked down into the crowd and saw them gathering the knife, the daggers, and the pliers, of course, for his 2 back teeth, and then they approached with obvious apparent hatred in their eyes. However, they were beaten to the altar by one woman. He saw, and he fell on his knees again. Even in this rain, she slipped and dirtied herself up, but she made it to her son on his knees on the sacrificial altar and grabbed him under the jaw and gave him a dead, neutral look and said simply into his eyes, "Ajuimi, die this time," his mother spoke, and she left, slipping into the mud off the platform. There was just time enough to say one more prayer to his God, the true God, and it was then that he realized that he hadn't prayed nearly enough so that he could learn and see truly with his blessed eyes. And again, he heard his wife. She had never stopped screaming. He had to block her out because if he were to survive for her, he'd need all of his concentration. Was it called for to speak the entire correct thing to God? Or should he be vulnerable and honest? Should he be selfish and ask to be saved because he was scared to die, which he wasn't? Or should he beg to live for Gianoa and only Gianoa's sake? All of that was not the issue. There was something he wasn't seeing. There was a clear avenue to take these clouds and the rain away. There was an easy solution to feed all the displaced hungry people. There was a true fact that would heal all the diseased and restore this village as a hope and beacon for all the villages in the nation. He was just rushing. He was trying to do it all himself, but he didn't know how to use his Itoriyama properly yet. And his little teleporting and conjuring could do nothing to the weather. Maybe a little food, but he could only produce so much. And he had no idea how to use his spirit to heal the seriously ill. This impasse at the edge of his life left him quite ironically lifeless. He just couldn't give up here on this altar, or that would be the harbinger of his death that he could not allow as he looked into Gianoa's face. He dropped his head and then looked straight up to the blackened sky and screamed until his voice cracked and was silenced by the force of his vocal cords. And as the executioners finally approached, he looked at them head on and shook his head and mouthed, "Janaya, Janaya, no way, no way." He felt his heart swelled, and he felt something massive incoming. It was like a pre-dawn of a miracle that would heal all the people here in company, and as far as they could hear the ringing trumpets he felt in his soul. In fact, he knew what the answer was now. He just couldn't express it yet. It was now completely spiritual. Just as an infant in the womb, it was alive and it was on this plane, but without seeing its face, it was just pure potential. But the executioners were coming, and they were climbing, and they were close to slitting his throat, stabbing his chest and then his thigh, pulling out his teeth and melting his hand with molten silver and slashing his face. But this was nothing. All was peace, because he knew once his father gave birth to the answer, everyone here would be healed. He found he was on his knees again, and he stood just as all of the executioners were on the altar. They tried to grab him, but he wouldn't allow himself to be accosted, and somehow he evaded or resisted successfully all their attempts to restrain him, and then he spoke. "Supi, Yominima, Yomanima, Mother, I forgive you, I forgive you. Joli Nuta, Yolpoli Niti, my wife, cry no more," Takuma demanded from the spot of his potential coming death. The answer was near. He just had to keep on speaking, and it would come out like a hurricane wind and take away all this strife and desperation and pageantry. Poliwa, Iol Jil, Gentuli, Sildi. Listen, we need our savior, Takuma began, and then he stopped suddenly because his unborn miracle now had a face in his consciousness. He knew the truth finally, and it was God's, the Father's way of showing him his mercy and letting him know that now his ignorance was a lesson, and now the only forgiveness that will redeem him was here, and it was time to speak it.